now the first thing we have to do is we simply have to go and say new file. So we are creating a new Python file. So we allow that to load. So then we can simply go over to rename this and let's say PCOS analysis. Then we rename this. Then the next thing we have to do is we can go over to say importing necessary libraries. So here we'll be importing the necessary libraries we are going to be using for our analysis. So we simply come here and make this a markdown. Then we can go over and run this. Now the first library we are going to be importing, we say we have to import pandas as PD. Then we import NumPy. Import NumPy as NP. Then we say import seaborn as SNS. Import seaborn as SNS. Then we say import, so we say from matplotlib, import pyplot as plt, right? Then we can say import warnings, right? So this is for ignoring all warnings. So to ignore all warnings, we just say warnings dot filter warnings. Then we say ignore. Now let's go ahead and run this. So we have an error. Okay, let's just say for this we can say, let's just say, okay, import matplotlib, right, dot pyplots as plt. Let's see if that works now. So let's go ahead and rerun this again. So that's actually worked now. Now the next thing we have to do is we have to import the data sets. We have to import data set. Now we turn this to a markdown. Right, then we can go ahead and run this. Then we can call the dataset df. Then we say df.pd.read underscore csv. Then we say arrow. So the next thing we are going to do is let's go over to copy the parts of the data sets. So this is the data sets we are going to be working on. So what we have to do is right click on this, then let's say copy as parts, right? Then we can go ahead and paste this right here. Okay, then we can go ahead to run this. Now let's go ahead to say data investigation. Okay, then we make this a markdown, then let's run this. Now I feel like they're actually looking too big, so let's go ahead and make them smaller. Okay, so we can go ahead and also make this smaller. Okay, so we can also make this smaller. Now the next thing we have to go ahead to do is our data investigation. Now the first thing I want us to do is let's look at the first 5 columns, all right, of this data set to know what we are working on. And to do that, we say df.head, all right. So let's run this. So now this shows us the 5 rows of the data set you're actually working on. So as you can see, we have here the LCell number, then we have here the patient's number 5, then we have here the PCOS, yes or no, where 0 stands for no and 1 stands for yes. As you can see, all these are actually encoded, right? Yes or no. 0 stands for no, 1 stands for yes. Then the age, right? Then the weight. Then we also see the height, right? Then we see the BMI, body mass index. Okay. Then we also see the blood group. Then we see the pulse rate, and we can also see the arrow breadth. So we are going to look at the mean of most of this. Then we can look at the fast food, like if the person takes fast food or not. Then regular exercise, yes or no, where 0 stands for no. Then we see BP systolic So we are going to look for the meaning of most of these so we understand what we are working on. As then we also see follicle, then we see follicle left, follicle right. That's follicle in the right ovaries and follicle in the left ovaries. Then here we see the average follicle size. That means the average size for the left follicle, the average size for the right follicle. Here and then here we see the endometrium, and over here we see unnamed. So we are going to actually look at how we can figure out all of this. Now the next thing I want us to do is let's look at the statistical information on data. And to do this, we say df.describe, right? df.describe. Now let's go ahead and run this. Now, this gives us more statistical information on our data, right? Now, you can see the count of each column. So from here, we can actually tell if we have missing data in our columns. As you can see, the count of each column should be 541. So we are going to confirm that. But when you look over here, you see that we have some columns that just has 540, and I think we just have one column with 540. Okay, so we are actually going to confirm that. So as you can see, this is the mean for each column. So as you can see, this is the mean for each column, then standard deviation and median. Okay, so let's just go ahead. Now the next thing I want us to confirm is I want us to check for missing values. Okay, missing values, right? Now we can simply say df dot is none. Okay, dot sum. All right, now let's go ahead and run this. Now this tells us if we actually have missing values. As you can see, for this we actually have one missing value for fast food. Then for this unnamed column, we actually saw right here. The unnamed column we actually saw right here. All right, we can see that all the columns are actually missing. Okay, all the columns are actually missing. Now let's get more information on that unnamed column. And let me say getting more info on the unnamed column, right? Now what I have to do here, I simply say dl. Okay, I usually say df, then I'm trying to get more information on unnamed, right? So I just have to copy this and put it over here. Then I say I want to do a value count for this. So I say value underscore count. Okay. Now let me run this and see. Now as you can see, it's showing us that we have an error and the key error is unnamed. Okay. Now we actually copied this unnamed from here, meaning that we did not actually make any typographical error. So the error should actually be coming from white spaces. Now let's go ahead and check in for white spaces. Let's go ahead and check for white spaces in columns. Now to do that, we say df dot columns, right? df dot columns. Now let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so say df dot columns. Now let's go ahead and look at this. Now let's look at if we actually have white spaces in our column. Now when you look at unnamed, right, as you can see, the name is just not unnamed. See, it is showing unnamed. Then we have this let me just make this a bit bigger so it's easier to see. Now when you look at here, now you see that we have this unnamed here, right? Now this is not just the name of the column. As you can see, we have those dots here, then we have this 44. So the name is actually unnamed, then we have semicolon and 44, right? So it's not a matter of the white spaces, it's a matter of a name error. Now when you look at this column, we actually have this column here. Okay, so we are going to be doing a couple of data cleaning when it comes to the column names. All right, but let's just go ahead and copy this, and let's just go ahead and copy this. Then let me make this a bit smaller. Then we can come over here and let's just paste this and let's run this again and see. Now, when we run this again, you see that it is actually giving us the result we actually wanted to get. But now I want to check for something else. And let me say I want to check for unique values. Okay, unique values in unnamed. Now to do that, I can simply say df.unique. Okay, Now let's run this and see. Okay, no. So we are trying to check for the unique value in unnamed, right? So what I have to do here is I simply have to go over here. Then I want to copy this right here and let me put this over here and let me run this again, right? Now, as you can see, these are the unique values we actually have in unnamed. So we are just going to leave that over there and move ahead because we are actually going to be dropping this particular column anyway. Now, the next thing I want us to do is I want us to check for duplicated columns. Okay, duplicated columns. Now, to do that, we say df.duplicated, right? Then let's go ahead and save run. As you can see, we actually have no duplicates. Okay. Now, the next thing I want us to move into, I want us to move into our data cleaning. But before we actually move ahead, I want us to check one last thing, which is I want us to check for our data types. Okay. So let's say checking for data types. Now to do that, we simply say df dot info, right? We say df.info. Now let's go ahead and run this. Now this gives us our data type, right? Now when you look at this, it actually gives us more information. Now before we actually move ahead with that, I want us to go ahead and check for the shape of our data. So let's say checking for data shape, okay? And to do that, we say df.shape, right? Now let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so this should be df.shape. Now this gives us 541 rows and 45 columns. Okay. Now when we actually go over here, we can actually tell which of our column is actually having a missing value, even though we have actually checked it over here, right? Now, so this is it. So, but what we are actually looking for is understanding the data type, okay? Now, as you can see, this is telling us it is an integer, patient file number integer, age is integer. Okay, so yes or no. So this is giving us an integer because this was actually encoded, right? Then weight is giving us float, height is float, then body mass index is also float, blood group integer, pulse rate integer. Then this is float. So this is floats. Okay. So this we actually have to confirm this marriage status. We actually have to confirm this. Okay. Now let's go ahead to say we want to see marriage status. So I want us to check something, right? Let's say getting info on marriage status, because marriage status is actually supposed to be a string, right? Now let's go ahead and say df. Then what are we trying to get more info on? We are trying to get more info on marriage status, right? Now let's say dot head, right? Now let's run this. Okay, this says marriage status yes, not just marriage status. Okay, so I think this makes sense now why it is a float, right? Okay, so marriage status yes. I think this actually means how many years the person has actually been married. Okay, I think that actually makes sense right now. Now, the next thing we can actually go ahead to check is pregnant, yes, no. Okay. The number of abortions. Now, before we go ahead, I want to see how many women are actually pregnant. And to do that, let me say getting more information, getting more information on what are we getting more information on? We are getting more information on pregnant. Okay. Now to do that, we say df dot. We are looking at getting more information on this, right? Then we say dot. We want to see value count. Okay, we want to see the value count, right? Then we go over to run this. As you can see, we are actually having an error here. It's saying invalid syntax. Okay, so when you look at this, I already see where the problem is coming from. So we are saying df dots. So we should eliminate this dots and let's run this again. Okay, now this shows us that we have 335 women that are not pregnant, and we have 206 women that are actually pregnant. So we can actually visualize this using a bar chart, okay? But we are going to be working on this visualization in Power BI. So majorly we are just using our Python for data cleaning. So let's move ahead. Now we can easily go over to our data cleaning. So let's go ahead and run this, okay? Now, the first thing I want us to do is I want us to drop some irrelevant columns. So let's say drop in columns. Okay. Now, before we go ahead to check the columns we are dropping, I want us to actually make something out. So what I want us to do is, okay, so let me just highlight this and copy this, and let me eliminate this here and paste it here. Now, I actually want us to check in first 5 columns. So I say df.shape, then I can simply, no, I'm saying df.head, not df.shape, please. So df.head. Now let's run this. Now the first column I want us to drop is we are going to be dropping this column, right? We are also going to be dropping this particular column, okay? Then the patient file number, I would actually love us to drop this particular patient file number because we are not actually going to be using it to any analysis for now. But this can actually change when we get to Power BI. I can decide to use this for a couple of visualizations. So I'm just going to be leaving this here. Now we are going to be dropping this column, right? And we are also going to be dropping this column. Okay. Now let's move ahead. Now the next thing I want us to do is I want us to go ahead and drop columns. Okay. Drop the columns. Okay. But before we do that, let me just create another cell here and let me paste this here. I actually want us to see columns names. Okay. So I can simply say df dot columns, then I can simply run this. Right now we can see the columns names here. Now to actually drop these columns, we can simply say df dot drop. Okay. Then we can simply say which columns are we dropping. So we are dropping 2 columns, right? So we can simply come here and go over here and copy this column name, then we can paste it over here, then we come over here and copy this, right, and actually paste it over here. Okay, so we can simply come here and say, or we can simply come here and say column should be equals to that, then we can simply say in place should be equals to true, right? So we can go ahead and run it. Now let's go ahead and confirm if we have actually dropped the columns, confirming if columns were dropped, right? So we can simply come here and say df dot head. Okay. Now let's go ahead and run this. So we have successfully dropped those columns from our data frame. Okay. Now the next thing I want us to do is I want us to go ahead and let's rename some column. But before we go ahead to rename most of these, I want us to go over to copy all this. Okay. I want us to go over to copy all this. Now, what I want us to do is this. I want us to go over to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to explain most of these column meaning. Now, over here, I can simply just come here and say, kindly give me a short explanation, right, for the columns in this data set. Okay, so we allow ChatGPT to do its thing. Now it's trying to explain everything for us. As you can see, the patient information. So this is the patient's file number. Then this is the indicates whether they have polycystic ovarian syndrome. Then this is the age, weight, height, body mass index. Okay. Then this is the blood group. Then vital signs. Then we see this is the pulse rate, heart rate in beats per minute. Okay. Then our respiratory rate, number of breaths per minute. Then this is hemoglobin level, and we have the BBT totally. That means it says the upper blood pressure reading. So it actually gave us a lot of explanations here, okay, for each column. So what we can actually do is we can simply say, okay, we can simply copy this, right? Let's just go ahead and copy this, and we can simply go over to our file. Okay, let's go over here and just over here we can simply add this and say, sorry, I would just like to copy this, then paste it here, then let me run this. Then I can simply come here and say explanation, okay, for columns meaning, right? So I can simply come over here and let me just make this a bit smaller. So we can simply just come over here and paste what ChatGPT gave to us. Okay, so we have to go back to that and let's copy it again. Then we go back and just paste that what ChatGPT gave to us. So this will actually help people understand the meaning of each column, right? So we can simply just go over here, then over here. Okay, so pulse rate and BP, eh, pimples, yes, fast food, regular registration, follicle, follicle number. Okay, so I think this actually makes sense. So we can simply run this. Now for this, we can simply make this, I think star makes it bold, if I'm not mistaken. Star, okay. So we can simply run this. Okay, I think this, why is this not getting bold? I want this to be bold. So I think it's three star at the beginning and three star at the left, right? Let's see. Okay, yeah, I think that's what. So these are just explanations to the columns, okay? Now I want us to rename these columns, okay? So okay, I think this is okay, age, yes. So I want us to rename this to age. Then we rename this to course rates. I will be okay, let's just go back, right? Waist inch, then waist hip ratio, skin darkening, hair loss, pimples, fast food, regular exercise, BP. So we just have a lot of those here. So we just have to take it slowly. Okay, so I'm actually thinking, is renaming actually necessary, or we just actually work with what we have? So that's what I'm trying to contemplate. I think we should actually leave the renaming for now. Right now, let's go over to something else. Now, I want us to go over to working on our missing data. Okay, so let's say working on missing data, working on missing data. Okay, so let's also check the missing data again. Then we say df dot is null, right? df dot is null dot sum. Okay, now let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so we just have a missing data in the marital status. Yes, okay. So probably one, okay, not just that. So we also have for these two, fast food. So we actually have two. Okay, we actually have two. So let's work on the missing data. Now, what I will do is we can actually drop the missing data, okay, the missing rows, because we just have one missing row, right? One missing row each. So we can actually drop them, okay, or fill them in with zero, okay? So let's just simply say we want to fill them with zero. So let's say we are filling missing values. okay, with 0. You can say df dot fill now. Okay, so we say df dot fill now. So we are filling forward. So this will be fast food. So we just have to pick this fast food here. Okay, so we pick this fast food here, then we just have to take it here, right? Then we can simply say, okay, so sorry, that has to be, so just Control Z that, that has to be a string, all right? Then we can simply say, so we can simply say we are replacing this with 0, right? Then we can actually take this down. Then we can simply say the next column we want to replace is this, right? We are trying to replace, the next column is marriage status, okay? Marriage status in years. We just have to copy this, then we come down here, all right? Then we can simply paste this here, okay? And but before we go ahead to paste that there, we need to also know that that is a string. So what we just have to do is we just indicate here that this is a string, right? This is a string. So we are replacing it with 0. Then over here we can just say in place should be equals to 2. So in place should be equals to 2. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. Okay, but before we go ahead and run this, we just have to put a comma here. So let's go ahead and run this. So it says what says got an expected word in place. So I think this should be in place, not in pace. Sorry. So in place is equals to true. So let's go ahead and run this again. Now let's go ahead and run this again to see if we have actually figured that out. Okay, as you can see now, we have actually successfully replaced our missing values, right? Now, the next thing I want us to do is I want us to go ahead and